He shuffled into the courtroom with wrists chained, the metal clinking sharp as gunfire in the sterile air. Heads turned, some with curiosity, most with disgust. To the gallery, he looked like nothing more than another homeless man pulled in off the street. But if you looked closer, just for half a second, you could see something else. The way he carried his shoulders, the way his eyes stayed down. That wasn't aimless, that was discipline beaten down but not erased. They laughed quietly, some covering it with coughs. One clerk muttered, "Repeat offender," and the words were scribbled on a yellow sticky note stuck to the case file. "Just another bum," it said without saying. "If you've ever believed that dignity shouldn't be judged by torn clothes and bad luck, you'll want to stay for this one. Seriously, this is the kind of story that flips a room upside down. And if you're from anywhere near Cook County, you've walked past this hallway. Shiny floors reflecting people who'd rather not see themselves in the glass. 2 nights earlier, rain hammered the plastic roof of a bus stop. The streets were empty except for one figure curled against the metal bench. Water pooled beneath his boots, soaking through tape that peeled away from the sole. A security guard spotted him through the storm and shook his head, muttering into a radio. By morning, the photo was already printed. Grainy, black and white, time-stamped in the corner. It showed an old man asleep under flickering lights, rain bouncing off the concrete. No context, no caption, just an image waiting to be twisted. Back in court, Elias Gray Mercer sat bent in a chair that squeaked when he moved. His jacket, olive once, now faded to the color of rust, hung from him like a flag left too long in the weather. The duct-taped boot pressed flat against the marble floor. Every step he had taken into that room had been echoed with laughter behind polished shoes. The prosecutor rose with polished ease, sliding that photo onto the record. He tapped it once for effect. Loitering. Trespassing. Disturbing the peace. Same story, different day. His voice was smooth, confident, the rhythm of someone already certain of victory. In the second row, a young public defender leafed through a thin folder without much interest. Jordan Lee looked exhausted, tie crooked, case notes barely skimmed. Another name on a long list, he thought, until he caught something. The old man's fist, scarred and veined, curling slow and tight on the table. It wasn't rage, it was something heavier. Jordan felt it in his chest before he even understood why. The judge raised an eyebrow, waiting. The prosecutor leaned into his performance. "Your Honor, this is not misfortune. This is misconduct. The state cannot allow this pattern to continue." Laughter from the gallery again, meaner this time. Someone whispered, "Get a job." Another added, "Put him away." Elias said nothing. His silence wasn't empty. It pressed against the room like the pause in a firefight when no one knows if the next breath will be their last. The gavel struck once, sharp as a coffin nail. The prosecutor smiled, thin, confident. "And this," he said, letting the photo linger for everyone to see, "is only the beginning." He was right, just not in the way he thought. Names carry weight, sometimes more than the chains rattling in a courtroom. Judge Sarah Coleman lowered her eyes to the case file, pen balanced loosely between her fingers. She had read 1,000 of these, petty charges stacked like yellowing newspapers, loitering, trespassing, disturbing the peace. A rhythm so dull she could hum it in her sleep. But then her gaze froze. Elias James Mercer. The letters didn't sit on the page, they echoed. Her chest tightened. Her son had written that name in dusty emails from a desert she could never picture. Sergeant Mercer. Gray. The one who pulled me out when the Humvee blew. The one who doesn't leave anyone behind. The fluorescent buzz filled the pause as Sarah forced her face into marble. Judges weren't allowed to feel, but her pulse betrayed her. Across the room, Prosecutor Whitmore cleared his throat, flipping papers with the certainty of a man playing a rigged game. "Your Honor, this defendant has shown a pattern of disregard. Business owners complain. Residents feel unsafe. The community cannot keep turning a blind eye." His words slid smooth as oil, but Sarah barely heard them. The name on that file had already dragged her back to 2009. Nights she sat awake, waiting for her son's messages to arrive. In the gallery, Clara Reyes adjusted her camera. She had come expecting filler, just another blog piece about the city sweeping up its streets. But when her lens found Elias, she froze. His sleeve had slipped, fabric torn at the elbow. Beneath it, a scar carved pale and jagged down his forearm. Not from bar fights, not from a fall, a battlefield scar. Her heart kicked. Her father had worn scars like that. He used to tell her, "Some marks never leave you and you don't want them to." She lowered the camera slowly. Something here wasn't matching the script. At the defense table, Jordan Lee frowned at the photograph Whitmore had offered as proof. Elias curled under a bus stop in the rain. It didn't look criminal. It looked like survival. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, telling himself it wasn't worth it. Just another case, right? Then Elias twitched, barely. His hand clenched on the table, veins rising like rope. Jordan caught it. And for some reason, he couldn't look away. That wasn't weakness. That was strength, coiled tight, trying not to show itself. The gallery didn't notice. They were too busy whispering, "Pathetic." Pitiful. A woman in pearls pinched her nose, though the air only smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Whitmore let the noise feed him. "Your Honor, this is about discipline. Letting it erode is like letting rot spread. The state recommends consequences, clear, firm, final." He tapped the folder as if it were scripture. Sarah's hand trembled against the bench. Her son's words echoed in her mind. "If it wasn't for Gray, I wouldn't be writing this. He carried me out when everyone else thought I was gone." The courtroom blurred, the murmurs, the laughter, Whitmore's sharp cadence, all dulled under the sound of memory. She forced her jaw steady, forced her face to remain carved in stone. Judges couldn't break, but inside she already had. Because now she knew exactly who the man in chains was, and knowing it nearly split her in two. Paper looks clean when it hides the mess. Whitmore strutted across the courtroom like it belonged to him, folder in hand, tabs lined up like trophies. He snapped it open, letting the pages flutter just enough to look impressive. "Your Honor," he said, voice oiled smooth, "the state presents multiple citizen complaints, independent, consistent, undeniable." He read one aloud, then another. Same clipped tone, same polished rhythm. Too polished. The gallery nodded along, lulled by the cadence. Jordan leaned over, squinting at the pages. His gut twisted. Real complaints were messy. Angry words, run-on sentences, bad spelling. These looked like someone had ironed them flat. Too clean, too neat. His throat tightened. He wanted to object, to point it out. But against Whitmore's courtroom swagger, his own voice would sound like static. He stayed silent, chewing the inside of his cheek, pen digging so hard into his pad it almost tore through. From the second row, Clara tilted her notebook just enough to hide her phone. Quick search, quick scroll, there it was. A complaint filed last year, same phrasing, nearly word for word. She muttered under her breath, "Copy and paste," and jotted down, "Cross-check all complaints." Whitmore thrived in the performance. He lifted his chin, pacing like he was closing in front of a jury that didn't even exist. Society cannot tolerate individuals who think rules don't apply to them. He slapped the folder shut, the sound sharp as a gavel. The gallery reacted on cue. "About time." "Lock him up already." Their whispers felt rehearsed, as if the room itself wanted him gone. Elias didn't move. His silence weighed more than Whitmore's folder, but only two people seemed to feel it, Jordan and Clara. On the bench, Judge Coleman sat stiff, her pen hovering. She stared at the name again, Elias Mercer. The tremor in her hand betrayed her just for a second. She pulled in a breath, clipped and shallow, then reached for a scrap of paper. Her handwriting was quick, urgent. "Find David Harrison, bring him here personally." She folded it twice, slid it toward the bailiff without looking up. The bailiff's eyes flickered, just enough to betray surprise. He pocketed the note, stepping quietly toward the side door. Almost no one noticed. Almost. Sarah's pulse raced. Elias's eyes lifted for a heartbeat, catching the motion before sinking again. Jordan tapped his broken pen, restless. Clara typed faster, the glow of her screen hidden by the shadow of her hand. Whitmore smirked like the game was already won. The courtroom clock ticked, each second landing too loud, too fast. The bailiff pushed the door open, disappearing with the folded note. When he came back, this wouldn't be just a petty case anymore. Courtrooms love routine, until a bigger dog walks in. The door banged open hard enough to rattle the panels. Every head turned. A man in a dark suit cut like it had never known a wrinkle strode inside, presence filling the room before he even spoke. "Your Honor," his voice rang, calm but commanding. "I am David Harrison, effective immediately. I'll be representing Mr. Mercer." The gallery erupted. Even Whitmore blinked before smirking to cover it. "Highly irregular," he said, chin high. "Last-minute theatrics disrupt the process." Judge Coleman's pulse hammered, but her voice stayed steady. "Accepted. Proceed, Mr. Harrison." Harrison reached the defense table, lowering his briefcase with deliberate calm. The latch clicked, sharp in the tense silence. Jordan Lee froze, relief flashing across his face before embarrassment set in. He felt benched. Harrison leaned close, voice low. "Stay sharp. Watch and learn." Jordan gripped his pen so tight it snapped with a soft crack. He swallowed hard, hiding the broken half under his notes. Whitmore straightened, eager to regain control. "The state has presented multiple complaints, clear and consistent. This defendant is a repeat." "Consistent?" Harrison cut in, smooth as silk. He held up a page from Whitmore's file, then another from his own briefcase. "Yes, too consistent." He stepped forward, word for word, down to the comma, a complaint copied from a different case 1 year earlier. His tone stayed low, but it sliced sharper than shouting. "Would you like me to read them side by side?" The gallery leaned forward. Even the court reporter stuttered, typing the same phrase twice. Whitmore flushed. "Even if there are similarities, the record remains. He was loitering, disturbing." "There is no disturbance," Harrison snapped, tossing the papers onto the table with a slap. "There is survival. A man under a bus stop in the rain doesn't commit a crime. He endures." The words echoed, heavy enough to hush the gallery. Jordan felt his chest rise, a flicker of pride he hadn't felt in months. Whitmore tried to sneer. "This is a courtroom, not a shelter. We deal in law, not sentiment." Harrison pivoted sharp, locking eyes with him. Law without humanity isn't justice. It's cruelty dressed up in procedure. Gasps rippled. The gallery buzzed with restless murmurs. On the bench, Judge Coleman gripped her gavel tighter, fingers trembling. Harrison's words hit too close to truth she'd buried. Whitmore slammed a hand down. "You're grandstanding." "I'm dismantling," Harrison said coolly, adjusting his tie, one falsehood at a time. He set both palms flat on the defense table, leaning in. His gaze cut across the room, landing on the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution wants you to see a nuisance. But truth isn't in recycled complaints or staged photographs. Truth lives in the record they've chosen to bury." Whitmore narrowed his eyes. And what record would that be? Harrison's voice dropped to a deliberate growl. "The military service file of Elias James Mercer." The gallery gasped. Papers rustled. Someone whispered, "Military." Sarah's pen froze mid-air. Whitmore barked, too loud, too quick. "Irrelevant, entirely irrelevant," Harrison thundered back. "Identity is never irrelevant." The room held its breath. The judge's gavel hovered, caught between duty and the weight of what she already knew. Some truths don't knock, they limp in. The back door creaked open, and a man stepped inside with the slow gait of someone who had walked with pain for years. His jacket was neat but faded, boots polished with care, and in his trembling hand he held a battered VA hospital card. He took a breath and raised his voice. "Your Honor, I'm here as a witness. Name's Harold Harlow. Most called me Doc. Combat Medic, Kandahar 2009. The gallery erupted in whispers. Phones came up, shutters clicked. Clara's pen nearly slipped from her hand. Her pulse raced. Her VA contact had pointed to Kandahar, and here was living proof right in front of her. Whitmore shot up instantly, jaw tight. "Objection, unscheduled testimony. This is a misdemeanor trial, not a war memorial." But Harrison didn't even blink. "Sometimes truth arrives uninvited, Mr. Whitmore. It has a way of walking through doors whether you like it or not." He gestured toward the man. "Let him speak." Judge Coleman hesitated only a heartbeat. Then she nodded. "Proceed." Doc's boots scuffed the floor as he made his way to the stand. The sound of his cane tapping echoed through the chamber. He stopped when his eyes met Elias. For a moment his voice broke. 15 years. I thought you were gone." Elias lifted his head, eyes red, lips pressed tight. He gave the smallest nod. Doc swallowed hard and faced the room. We were ambushed. Fire everywhere. I caught shrapnel in my leg, couldn't move. Elias dragged me out. I begged him to leave me. He didn't. He carried me through bullets, through hell. Then he went back for 2 more. Without him, I'd be carved into stone somewhere. Instead, I'm standing here. The gallery hushed. No laughter this time. Only silence. Clara's hand shook as she scribbled. In her notebook, first-hand validation, Kandahar scar matches. Her phone buzzed under the paper. Another coded message from her VA source. Bronze Star recommendation found. Sealed. Mention of Valor protocol. Proceed carefully. Her eyes widened. Valor protocol again. The words pulsed like neon in her mind. Whitmore pounced, his voice sharp. Memories blur over time, Mr. Harlow, especially traumatic ones. You could be mistaken. You could be exaggerating. Doc turned, cane planted firm, eyes hard. I never forget the man who carried me out. Certainty doesn't fade when every breath since then belongs to him. The gallery stirred, some wiping their eyes. Whitmore sneered. This is an emotional circus. Testimony without corroboration is worthless. Veterans cling to stories. Careful, Harrison cut in, voice like steel. You tread close to spitting on the graves of men braver than yourself. The tension spiked. Even the judge's pen stilled. Jordan leaned forward, whispering, If Whitmore twists this... Harrison didn't take his eyes off the prosecutor. He won't. Truth is louder than spin. But Whitmore wasn't finished. He flipped open a new folder, lips curling. And what about this? He held up a sheet of government paper, seal stamped at the top. According to this report, Elias Mercer displayed erratic behavior under fire, disobeyed orders, endangered his unit. He was discharged for instability, not for heroism. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Clara's blood ran cold. Her contact had warned her. 2 files, one praising him, one condemning him. Whitmore stepped forward, waving the page like a dagger. His voice rose with triumph. This isn't courage. This is recklessness. And it's right here in black and white. Paper cuts deepest when no one signs it. Whitmore brandished the page like it was the final nail. Erratic under fire. Unfit for duty. That's who this man is. His voice was sharp, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. The gallery murmured. Doubt trickled in, quick and dangerous. Harrison rose slowly, brushing his jacket smooth. His voice was quiet, measured. Fascinating document you've got there, counselor, but let's look closer. He reached out, plucked the page from Whitmore's hand, and turned it to face the bench. Notice anything missing? Judge Coleman leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. No signature, no commanding officer, no medical examiner. Just a stamp floating alone. Harrison's tone sharpened. Unsigned, no accountability, just convenient ink on government letterhead. Tell me, Mr. Whitmore, how often do you condemn men based on ghost signatures? A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the gallery. Whitmore flushed, jaw clenching. The hum of the air conditioner filled the pause. Paper crackled under Harrison's fingers as he set the report down, deliberately like laying a trap. At the defense table, Jordan whispered, We don't have the proof, do we? Harrison didn't look at him. His reply was soft, almost like a mantra. Storms reveal what calm hides. In the second row, Clara's phone buzzed. She shielded it under her notebook, thumb flying. A file came through, half blacked out with thick bars of redaction. She scrolled, heart hammering. Valor Protocol. Kandahar, 2009. Honors withheld. Actions classified. Her breath caught. She printed it fast, slipping the folded page to the bailiff with a whispered, For Harrison. Urgent. The bailiff delivered it discreetly. Harrison unfolded it under the table, eyes scanning the blacked-out lines. His mask cracked for the first time, a sharp inhale, a flicker of recognition. He refolded it slowly, slid it into his jacket pocket, and tapped the table once with 2 fingers. Elias caught the gesture. His lips moved, barely audible. They buried it. Harrison gave the faintest nod, their eyes locking. For a heartbeat, silence passed between them like old soldiers who didn't need words. Whitmore pressed his attack, louder now. Your Honor, enough of these distractions. The state asks for an immediate ruling. Admit the report, pass sentence, end this farce. The gallery buzzed with anticipation. The fluorescent lights flickered, the hum turning sharp like static. Harrison stood taller, his presence pulling the air tight. Your Honor, before this court condemns a man on unsigned accusations and buried files, the defense calls a witness, not a journalist, not a medic, a soldier. Whitmore scoffed. And where is this phantom soldier? Harrison's gaze cut sharp as steel. His words carried the weight of certainty. Waiting, because some men keep their silence until their brother needs them most. He stepped forward, voice ringing clear. The defense calls Captain Raymond Doyle, United States Army, retired. The room erupted. Some names enter a room like thunder. Captain Raymond Doyle, United States Army, retired, the bailiff announced, and every head swiveled. The man who entered wore a plain grey suit, shoulders stiff though the years had bent his frame. His hair was cropped short, white as frost, and his face was etched with lines carved by decades of command. Even without the uniform, he carried himself like someone still counted heads every time he walked into a room. His shoes struck the floor in steady rhythm as he crossed to the witness stand. The gallery fell silent. Even Whitmore's smirk flickered. Doyle raised his hand for the oath, then sat upright, spine straight, eyes already locked on Elias. Recognition flickered there. Pride, guilt, sorrow tangled together. I served with Sergeant Elias Mercer, he began, his voice deep, steady. Kandahar Province, 2009. He wasn't just another soldier. He was the man who made decisions when radios went dead, when orders didn't make sense, when the only thing standing between us and being names on a wall was him. Whitmore sprang to his feet. Objection. Irrelevant character testimony. We're not here to relitigate military history. Harrison didn't flinch. We're here to decide if this man is a nuisance or a monument. History is not irrelevant. Judge Coleman hesitated, gavel raised, then lowered it. Proceed, Captain. Doyle inhaled slow. His eyes never left Elias. Yes, Mercer disobeyed an order that night. The order was retreat. We had 3 men down, bleeding in the sand. Command told us to pull back and leave them. He refused. He went back. He carried them one by one while the rest of us covered. 6 men lived because he broke that order, including me. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Some sat forward, others whispered. Clara scribbled furiously. Valor protocol wasn't about misconduct. It was about sacrifice. Whitmore pounced, circling like a predator. Captain, you were his commanding officer, weren't you? If anyone benefits from painting him as a hero, it's you. Otherwise, you're the man who lost control of his unit. The jab landed heavy. Doyle's jaw flexed, but his voice stayed steady. You think I want this? To sit here 15 years later reliving the men I lost? No. I carry those failures every day. But Mercer isn't one of them. He's the reason I lived long enough to regret anything at all. The words settled thick in the room. Jordan felt goosebumps crawl his arms. Clara stopped writing for a second, just staring, breath shallow. Whitmore sneered. If Mercer saved all these men, why no medal? Why no commendation? Doesn't that strike you as strange? Maybe the army knew what you refused to admit. Doyle's eyes hardened. The army buried it under a seal. Valor protocol. That's why. Not because he failed, but because he succeeded in a way they couldn't file neatly away. Some things stay classified. Gasps again, this time louder. Clara nearly dropped her pen. She had seen those words in black bars, redacted. Now they were spoken aloud in open court. Whitmore slammed his hand down. Conspiracy theories, hearsay, this is desperation. Harrison stepped forward, calm and sharp. Or maybe this is the first truth the state can't redact. At the defense table, Elias shifted, his chest rising hard. His breathing grew shallow, rough, his fists clenched tight, chains rattling. Stop, he rasped, his voice hoarse. Doyle turned toward him, unflinching. They deserve to know, Doyle said quietly. Elias's voice cracked louder now. Not like this, not dragging their ghosts into it. His chains slammed against the table with a sound that cut through the room like gunfire. The gallery jumped, gasps, murmurs, all tangled. Whitmore's voice shot up, triumphant. There, unstable, volatile, you see it now. But no one laughed, not this time. Too many eyes were locked on Elias, standing straighter than he had in years. His voice carried low but firm, every syllable vibrating through the marble. "I'll speak for myself." The gavel struck, but the court wasn't in control anymore. The room belonged to Elias Mercer. Some silences last year's, until one word cracks them open. Elias rose, chains rattling, shoulders straightening as if the years fell off in one breath. His voice was low, raw, but steady. "You want the truth? Then you'll hear it from me. No more files, no more ghosts." The gallery leaned in. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to hold its breath. "I broke the order," he said, eyes fixed on a horizon only he could see. "Command said retreat, but 3 men lay bleeding in the dirt. I could have walked, saved myself. But you don't leave brothers behind, not while you can still move." His chest heaved. Bullets slicing the night, sand turning red. I dragged Doc first, leg ripped open, then Ramirez, lungs drowning. Then Collins, 19 years old, crying for his mum. I carried them one by one, fire chewing up the ground behind me. The room stayed silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle. 2 more I couldn't reach, Elias whispered, voice breaking. 2 I'll never stop seeing. Their faces burn in me more than the bullets ever did. And when Command wrote the reports, they didn't mention the lives saved. They wrote about the order I broke. Easier that way. Easier to stamp me unstable than admit the truth. His fists clenched, veins raised under scarred skin. That's why I stayed quiet. Because medals don't weigh as much as names carved in stone. And I already carry enough weight. Judge Coleman's eyes blurred. Michael's words replayed in her head. Emails signed with shaky gratitude. Sergeant Gray saved me again. She bit her lip, but tears slipped anyway. Jordan sat frozen, his pen sliding from his fingers. He'd come in half asleep, resigned. Now shame burned through him, and under it something else, respect, fierce, unshakable. Clara scribbled until her notes blurred. Her hands trembled. This wasn't a headline anymore. This was history spoken alive. Elias lifted his chin. His voice steadied. Sergeant Michael Coleman, Corporal Ramirez, Specialist Collins, Doc Harlow. 6 names I can still say because I carried them out myself. 2 names I'll never forgive myself for leaving. That's my truth. Write what you want in your files. Call me unstable, reckless, broken. But those men breathed longer because of me. And I'll carry both their lives and their deaths until I stop breathing too. The names carved the air like stone. Even the clerk's typing hands froze. For the first time in years, Elias's eyes softened. He looked at Doc, then at Sarah, then down at the chains, and the silence around him wasn't shame. It was reverence. Whitmore shot up, desperation cracking his voice. "This is theatre, a plea for pity." Elias turned, gaze like iron. "Pity is for the broken. I don't want pity. I want them remembered." The words hit like stone dropped into water, rippling out, unstoppable. Then the double doors groaned open at the back of the courtroom. 2 uniformed officers marched in, boots striking in sync. One carried a sealed box wrapped in blue cloth, insignia gleaming under the harsh lights. The bailiff's voice cracked through the silence. "Delivery for the court, from the Department of the Army." Some boxes don't just hold medals, they hold years of silence. The senior officer set the blue cloth gently on the Clark S table and unfolded it with precise care. The gallery leaned in, no one daring to breathe. Inside the box lay 2 medals, ribbons untouched by time, the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star. A folded letter, seal of the Department of the Army, unbroken until this moment, rested beneath them. The officer's voice rang clear. By directive of the Department of the Army, recognition withheld under Valor Protocol is hereby restored. Sergeant Elias James Mercer is awarded the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star for extraordinary actions in Kandahar, Afghanistan, 2009. The words hit like a bell in the chamber. The gallery rose, not by order but by instinct. Elias gripped the table, his knees buckling slightly. His lips trembled. "No! Those aren't mine. They belong to the ones who didn't come home." Judge Sarah Coleman stood slowly, tears streaking her face but her voice steady. "Sergeant, my son came home because of you. He wrote to me with his own hand that you were the bravest man he'd ever known. These medals aren't only for you, they're for every man who breathed because you refused to walk away." Whitmore shot to his feet, voice breaking with panic. "This is theater, forged sympathy. How do we know this isn't staged?" The officer turned, eyes cold. "Counselor, you may question many things, but you will not question the seal of the United States Army." The gallery erupted in murmurs of approval. Whitmore collapsed back into his chair, defeated. Harrison buttoned his jacket, voice calm but cutting. "We began this trial with trespassing charges. We end with the truth. This man's only crime was surviving long enough to be forgotten." Jordan felt his chest tighten, shame and awe flooding him all at once. For weeks, he had wondered if the law was just paper and signatures. But watching Elias stand straighter as medals touched his jacket, he finally understood. Sometimes law could also restore what was stolen. The senior officer pinned the Purple Heart to Elias's torn coat, just above the scar at his sleeve. His hands shook as he touched it, whispering, "For Ramirez, for Collins, for Michael, for all of them." Then the bronze star gleamed against the faded olive fabric. Elias closed his eyes, breathing deep, as though carrying not just his own survival but the weight of every man he'd named. Judge Coleman raised the gavel. Her voice cracked once, then steadied. "All charges against Sergeant Elias James Mercer are dismissed. This court recognizes his service, his sacrifice, and his honor." She paused, eyes meeting his. "On behalf of my son and this nation, thank you." The gavel struck one last time. When Elias walked out of the courthouse, the sun had finally broken through gray clouds. Light spilled across the steps. Reporters crowded, cameras flashing, but the noise stilled when he appeared. No jeers, no shouts, only silence until one voice rose from the crowd, clear and proud. "Sergeant." The word caught, echoed, spread until it became a chorus. Elias lifted his chin, his chains gone. The weight still lived in him, but for the first time it didn't bend him. Clara closed her notebook and typed the first line of her story. The courtroom did not rise to convict. It rose to honor. Jordan exhaled, shoulders lighter, as if seeing his path forward for the first time. And Elias Mercer stepped into the light, no longer forgotten. This story reminds us that dignity can outlast silence, and truth can survive even when buried under red tape. Veterans carry scars the world doesn't see, not just on their bodies but in the way they're treated when the war is over. Sometimes society mistakes survival for weakness and paperwork for truth. But behind every statistic is a person whose choices carried weight the rest of us may never understand. From a psychological perspective, silence often isn't weakness. It's a shield. Trauma teaches some men to hold their stories tight until the moment demands release. And when they finally speak, we're reminded that history isn't written in ink. It's written in breath, in scars, in the lives still here because of them. If this story hit you today, share it with someone who needs to remember that dignity always finds its way back.